The champagne smells wrong. Not spoiled, expensive wrong. The kind of scent that costs more than rent, poured into crystal that catches light like tiny knives. Caelum holds the glass without drinking, feels the condensation slip between his fingers while marble stretches in every direction beneath chandeliers that could fund a semester. Manhattan knows how to build cages that look like ballrooms. His ex's hand rests at the small of his back. Too firm. Fingers spread wide enough to claim territory, pressing through the thin fabric of a shirt Caelum didn't choose but was told looked appropriate. The pressure sits just below his ribs, a reminder dressed as guidance. Cameras float through the crowd like insects, professional ones with red recording lights, phones held at careful angles by guests pretending they're not documenting everything. Caelum catalogs each lens the way prisoners count bars. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. The invitation arrived 3 weeks ago on cardstock thick enough to stop a bullet. Private feast for cultural patrons. Varek's name stamped in gold below the venue details. His foundation logo pressed into the paper like a brand. Attendance wasn't requested. It was required under Section 7C of the grant agreement Caelum signed 6 months ago, when independence meant accepting strings he couldn't see yet. Legal coercion doesn't need handcuffs. Varek guides him deeper into the hall with that hand still planted against his spine. Guests part without acknowledging the movement, conversations flowing around them like water around stones. An older woman in pearls glances at Caelum's face, then away so fast her earrings swing. A man in navy checks his phone and smiles at nothing. They know Caelum thinks, or they've learned not to notice. The scent changes near the center tables. Cologne layered over sweat, perfume mixed with something sharper. Anxiety has a smell when it gathers in enclosed spaces, when people smile with their mouths but not their eyes. Varek's thumb traces a small circle against Caelum's lower back, the gesture almost affectionate if you didn't know what it meant. Smile. Varek murmurs near his ear, breath warm and laced with scotch. People are watching. Caelum's face shifts. Not a smile, a flexing of muscles that approximates one. His cheeks ache with the effort, jaw tight enough to grind teeth, but the shape appears acceptable because Varek's fingers relax slightly. 3 men sit at separate tables, scattered through the room like points on a triangle. Identical bone structure, same dark hair swept back from foreheads that catch the light at matching angles. They don't look at each other, but Caelum feels the geometry of their placement, the way their stillness creates weight in the space. The Valmeri triplets. He's heard the name attached to shipping contracts, infrastructure deals that move through city council meetings without public comment. Money that doesn't announce itself but shapes everything it touches. Varek steers him toward the front, past tables draped in cream linen and centerpieces constructed from orchids that probably cost more than Caelum's monthly stipend. The pressure at his back increases when he hesitates, fingers digging in just enough to leave marks under the shirt. They didn't invite me to reconcile, Caelum realizes, the thought landing with the weight of swallowed glass. They invited me to demonstrate obedience. A stage rises at the room's far end, modest in height but positioned so every table has a clear view. Microphones standing silver and patient under a spotlight that isn't on yet but will be. Will be. Dessert courses arrive on carts wheeled by staff in black who know how to be invisible. Chocolate something with gold leaf, plated art that nobody actually wants to eat. Guests lift forks and make appreciative sounds. Phones reposition to capture the presentation. Varek's hand slides higher, fingers finding the base of Caelum's skull where hair meets skin. The touch looks casual from a distance, affectionate even the way a partner might steady someone in a crowd. But Caelum feels each fingertip like separate points of pressure mapping territory, claiming space that isn't offered. His breath catches. Not a gasp, just a small hitch that only someone touching him would notice. Varek notices. It's almost time, Varek says, still close enough that his words don't carry past Caelum's ear. For your apology. Caelum's glass slips, just slightly, champagne sloshing against crystal without spilling. He tightens his grip, but the damage is visible, the loss of control, the flinch. Exactly what Varek wanted to see. Across the room, one of the triplets sets down his fork with precision that draws no attention. The movement is small, contained, but Caelum tracks it anyway because his body has learned to monitor threats and this man's stillness registers as something else. Not danger exactly. Assessment. The lights shift. Conversations lower to murmurs that echo off marble and glass. Someone taps a microphone. 3 short bursts of sound that make heads turn toward the stage. Varek's fingers slide fully into Caelum's hair. Not pulling yet. Just threading through, claiming purchase, positioning for leverage that anyone who's felt this before would recognize instantly. The guests who glance oversee intimacy. Caelum feels the precursor to violence dressed in familiar clothing. His scalp tingles where fingertips rest against roots. The sensation isn't pain, not yet, but his body remembers what comes next with the clarity of muscle memory. His shoulders want to hunch forward, protective, but he keeps them straight because curling makes it worse. Smile, Varek repeats, fingers tightening just enough to lift Caelum's chin up by degrees. Or I'll make this educational. The triplet who set down his fork earlier shifts in his seat. Barely perceptible, a redistribution of weight that could mean anything or nothing. His brothers don't move, but Caelum feels the triangle of their attention tighten by inches. Cameras lift. Red lights bloom across the room like warning signals. Could you forgive someone who hurt you if they did it in front of people who refused to help? Varek's apartment had a lock that only worked from the outside. Caelum noticed 3 months into the relationship, when the bathroom door wouldn't open one morning and Varek explained the building was old. Mechanisms temperamental, nothing to worry about really. Just jiggle the handle a certain way. The bedroom door stuck sometimes too. The front door's deadbolt required a key from both sides. Fire code violation Varek promised to fix but never did. Small things. Easy to explain away individually. The foundation contract arrived printed on letterhead that smelled like leather and legacy. 12 pages of terms Caelum read twice while Varek watched from across the desk in his home office. Fingers steepled, smile patient. The grant provided living expenses, studio space, insurance, connections to galleries that actually mattered. Everything an artist needed to stop working 3 side jobs and finally create. Section 7C outlined mandatory appearances. Donor events, fundraisers. Select private functions where grant recipients demonstrated the foundation's impact through their presence. Professional attire required. Attendance non-negotiable without written notice submitted 14 days prior. It's standard, Varek had said, sliding a pen across mahogany. You want people to see your work, you need to be seen. That's how the industry functions. Caelum signed. He needed to eat more than he needed to read legal language designed to sound reasonable. The first event was a gallery opening where Varek introduced him to collectors whose names appeared in gossip columns. Caelum wore clothes Varek selected that morning, stood where Varek positioned him, laughed at jokes he didn't find funny because Varek's hand stayed warm against his lower back and the pressure increased whenever Caelum's smile faltered. You're doing great, Varek whispered during the third conversation with a woman whose family endowed museums. Just like we practiced. They hadn't practiced. But Caelum said nothing because contradicting Varek in public meant consequences delivered later in private. And he was learning which battles mattered. Abuse doesn't start with bruises. It starts with edited realities. Phone calls to friends became complicated. Not forbidden. Varek never forbade anything. But the apartment's cell reception was terrible, and Varek's office had better signal if Caelum wanted to use the landline, except the landline required asking permission because it was technically Varek's business line. Easier to just text. Except texts felt monitored even when they probably weren't, and eventually it seemed simpler to let friendships dissolve through benign neglect. Money flowed through Varek's accounts. The grant deposited there for tax purposes, something about foundation liability and proper documentation. Varek transferred the stipend to Caelum monthly, always on time, always the full amount minus what seemed like reasonable deductions for shared expenses. Rent, utilities, groceries purchased together. When Caelum suggested opening a separate account, Varek looked hurt. Don't you trust me? After everything I've done to help your career. So Caelum dropped it. Trust became easier than conflict. Isolation doesn't happen overnight. It accrues through 1,000 small reasonable explanations until you're alone without anyone making you be alone, and that's how they convince you it's your choice. Tonight's invitation arrived with the others, part of the required event calendar distributed quarterly. Varek's name featured prominently on the host committee. Private feast for select patrons. Black tie optional translated to black tie mandatory for anyone hoping to maintain foundation relationships. Caelum had read the date and felt his stomach contract. 3rd anniversary of when they met. Varek would mark that. Would use it. Perfect timing, Varek had said, watching Caelum's face for reaction. We can show everyone how strong we are together. The contract meant Caelum legally couldn't refuse attendance without forfeiting the grant. Forfeiting meant losing the studio lease signed under foundation guarantee. Losing insurance that covered medication he needed. Losing everything the past year had built even if that foundation was sand. He'd checked anyway, called the foundation office, spoke to someone in compliance who confirmed what he already knew. Section 7C was binding. 14 days written notice for excused absence. Medical emergency or family death only. Documentation required. Is there a problem with the event? The compliance officer had asked, tone suggesting problems reflected poorly on grant recipients. No problem, Caelum had replied, and hung up feeling like he'd just agreed to his own execution. Varek helps him pick clothes the evening before. Navy slacks that fit well enough to be presentable but not so well they attract wrong attention. Cream shirt, simple, paired with a blazer Varek says makes Caelum look mature. Sophisticated. Like someone who deserves the opportunities he's been given. They practice conversation in the living room. Varek asks likely questions, corrects Caelum's answers when they sound too casual or too defensive. How's the new work progressing? Wonderfully, the studio space has been transformative. What's your next exhibition? Still in planning stages, but exciting possibilities. Do you enjoy the foundation events? Absolutely, the networking has been invaluable. Lies delivered smoothly enough to sound like truth. Remember, Varek says, straightening Caelum's collar with fingers that linger too long against his throat. People are watching. They're always watching. How you present yourself reflects on the foundation. On me. Caelum nods because agreeing is safer than the alternative. He realizes somewhere between the rehearsed responses and Varek's approval that he can't leave the event early. Can't claim illness or emergency without documentation he doesn't have. The contract has trapped him as effectively as locked doors that only open from one side, and tomorrow night he'll smile through whatever Varek has planned because that's what survival looks like when it's dressed in grants and opportunities. His phone stays silent in his pocket during the car ride to the venue. No one to call who would understand why he feels like he's being escorted to something worse than a party. The foundation owns his presence for the next 4 hours minimum. Varek owns considerably more. The champagne glass sweats against his palm now, condensation mixing with perspiration his body produces without permission. Varek's fingers rest in his hair, not pulling yet but present. A promise of what's possible if Caelum doesn't cooperate. Across the room, one of the Valmeri triplets removes his cufflinks. Slow, methodical, sliding each piece free and setting them on the table with the care someone might use handling weapons. His jacket remains buttoned, but the gesture suggests preparation for work that requires freedom of movement. Varek sees it too. His grip in Caelum's hair tightens fractionally. Smile, he whispers again, the word sharp enough to cut. Or I'll make sure everyone remembers why you needed my help in the first place. Have you ever been trapped somewhere you were supposed to want to be? Dessert plates scatter light like broken promises. The room has shifted without movement, attention gathering weight until it presses against Caelum's skin from every direction. Forks pause mid-air. Conversations trail into silence that feels deliberate. Cameras reposition with the subtle sounds of electronic focus adjusting. The stage waits 15 feet ahead. Spotlight warming to life in gradual illumination that makes the microphone stand gleam. Varek's fingers tighten in Caelum's hair. Not pulling yet. Still in that space where it could be mistaken for affection by anyone not paying attention to the angle of Caelum's neck. the way his shoulders have gone rigid despite visible efforts to appear relaxed. "They're ready," Varric says, voice carrying the warmth of shared secrets. "Time for you to show everyone how grateful you are." Caelum's throat works around words that won't form. His champagne glass has migrated to a nearby table, set down by hands he doesn't remember moving. The marble beneath his feet feels less solid than it should, as though the floor might give way if he shifts weight wrong. "I don't want to," he manages, quiet enough that only Varric hears. Wrong response. Varric's hand twists. Sharp, efficient, the motion disguised as steadying someone who stumbled, except Caelum hasn't moved and his scalp ignites with pain that radiates down his spine in electrical bursts. His body jerks forward, instinct trying to follow the direction of force to minimize damage, but Varric holds him in place with the leverage of fingers wound through hair at the root. Phones lift throughout the room. Not to help, to document. The distinction carves itself into Caelum's awareness with the clarity of acid on glass. He can see the screens brighten, recording indicators bloom red, angles adjust to capture his face as Varric pulls him toward the stage with violence dressed as guidance. Guests watch with expressions that range from uncomfortable to entertained, but none move to intervene. This is how abuse survives in rooms full of witnesses. It performs as something else: discipline, tough love, private matters between partners, until everyone watching can pretend they didn't see what their eyes recorded. Caelum's feet move because not moving means worse pain. Varric drags him forward 3 steps, for the grip in his hair constant as a leash. The distance to the stage shrinks with each step while the room expands in his peripheral vision, faces blurring into audience, cameras multiplying until it feels like the walls themselves are recording. Sound distorts. Conversations warp into frequencies that don't make sense. Silverware against porcelain becomes sharp percussion without rhythm. His own breathing amplifies inside his skull until it drowns everything except the specific pain of hair pulling against follicles that were never designed to bear weight this way. He catches himself dissociating. The feeling is familiar. Consciousness separating from body, awareness floating just above the situation like a balloon someone forgot to tie down. His vision tunnels, peripheral darkness creeping inward, and he forces his eyes wider because disappearing into his head right now means losing track of threats he needs to monitor. The triplets. They're still there, still scattered through the room in their deliberate triangle. The one who removed his cufflinks has his hands flat on the table now, palms down, fingers spread. His brothers mirror the posture at their respective positions, 3 points of identical stillness that somehow creates pressure in the space between them. They haven't moved to help, haven't called out or stood or done anything that would constitute intervention. But they're watching with focus that feels different from the cameras, attention that calculates rather than consumes. Caelum locks eyes with the nearest one, the brother seated closest to the stage. His face could be carved from expensive stone, expression neutral in a way that suggests control rather than indifference. For 3 seconds they maintain connection while Varric pulls Caelum another step forward, and something passes between them that Caelum can't name but feels like recognition. Then Varric yanks hard enough to snap Caelum's head back, and the moment breaks. "Don't look at them," Varric hisses, close enough that his breath dampens Caelum's ear. "Look at the stage. Look where you're going." The stage rises before them, 3 steps up to a platform that might as well be a gallows. The microphone waits patient and silver under light that's grown bright enough to sting Caelum's eyes. His scalp throbs with each heartbeat, pain pulsing in rhythm with blood flow, and he can feel individual hairs separating from follicles under sustained pressure. Varric releases him. The absence of pain is almost worse than its presence. Caelum's body floods with relief so intense it registers as nausea, equilibrium destabilized by the sudden lack of force directing his movement. He sways, catches himself, lifts one hand halfway to his head before stopping because touching the damage in public would acknowledge it happened. "Up," Varric says, not loud but carrying. "Let's not keep everyone waiting." The crowd watches. Caelum can feel their attention like physical weight, hundreds of eyes cataloging his disheveled hair, the flush spreading across his cheeks that has nothing to do with warmth, the way his hands shake despite visible efforts to still them. Some guests have lowered their phones. Not many, most still film, but a few now hold devices uncertainly as though questioning what they're choosing to capture. An older man near the back stands halfway, then sits again when his wife touches his arm. A woman in red exhales loud enough to carry across marble. No one intervenes. Caelum's foot finds the first step, then the second. His legs function through muscle memory that predates conscious thought, body moving because stopping means worse consequences than continuing. The stage surface is wood beneath thin carpet, his shoes making small sounds that the microphone probably picks up and amplifies through speakers he can't see. Varric follows 2 steps behind. Close enough to maintain control, far enough to appear separate. Giving Caelum space to perform contrition on his own, while remaining positioned to enforce compliance if necessary. The microphone stands at Caelum's chest height. He could grab it, could pull it close and speak words Varric hasn't scripted. The impulse surfaces sharp and dangerous, the kind of thought that leads to consequences his body already knows how to fear. 3 seconds pass. 5. The room holds its collective breath. Varric's hand returns to Caelum's lower back. That same claiming pressure, fingers spread wide. Tell them, he murmurs, how much the foundation has meant to your career. How grateful you are for the opportunities I've provided. Caelum's fingers curl at his sides. His nails dig crescents into palms, small pain to ground against larger panic. The cameras are still recording. The triplets are still watching. Guests sit frozen in tableau, desserts melting forgotten on plates. He opens his mouth. Varric's thumb presses harder against his spine in warning. What would you say into a microphone if speaking might cost you everything? Caelum's hand moves before his brain finishes the decision. His fingers close around the microphone stand, metal cool and solid against his palm. He pulls it toward himself instead of leaning into its fixed position, the motion claiming space rather than entering it. The microphone separates from its clip with a small click that the speakers amplify into a gunshot-sharp report echoing off marble. Varric's thumb digs into his spine. Caelum steps forward, breaking contact. The room's attention crystallizes into something dense enough to stop breathing. Every phone screen glows red with recording indicators. Faces blur into a mass of expectation, and the silence expands until it becomes its own presence. Watching, waiting, hungry for whatever happens next. Abuse doesn't start with bruises, Caelum says. His voice cracks on the first word, steadies by the third. The microphone catches everything. The slight rasp from a throat gone dry, the tremor he can't quite eliminate, the way the sentence lands in space with more weight than its syllables should carry. Behind him, Varric goes still. Predator immobility. The kind of frozen that precedes violence. Caelum keeps talking before his nerve breaks. It starts when someone convinces you their money is your oxygen. When contracts become collars you didn't feel closing until you're already choking. When your presence at events like this isn't a privilege, it's a lease payment on your own life. The words tumble out with increasing momentum, each sentence pulling the next behind it like cars on a track that's only got one direction. His hands shake around the microphone, knuckles white with pressure, but his voice grows steadier as terror transforms into something sharper. You're watching me right now and wondering if I'm having a breakdown, if this is embarrassing, if someone should stop me. He pauses, lets the silence stretch for 2 beats. You should be wondering why nobody helped when he dragged me up here by my hair. A woman near the front drops her phone. It hits her plate with a sound like bones breaking. Varric moves, hand reaching for Caelum's shoulder, but freezes mid-motion when Caelum sidesteps without looking back. The dodge is instinctive, body trained through repetition to anticipate Varric's positioning, and the fact that it happens automatically says more than the words still spilling into amplified space. The foundation contract I signed requires attendance at donor events. Sounds reasonable until you realize it means I legally can't leave early. Can't refuse invitations. Can't say no to anything framed as professional development. Caelum's laugh scrapes out harsh and mirthless. That's not employment. That's ownership with paperwork. Security personnel line the room's perimeter, 4 of them visible in black suits with earpieces. They shift weight from foot to foot, hands moving toward weapons they haven't drawn yet, eyes tracking between Caelum on stage and someone off to the side giving instructions Caelum can't hear. But they don't advance. Varric notices too. His face does something complicated, confusion-chasing, anger-chasing calculation. "Security," he says, voice sharp enough to carry despite lacking a microphone. "Remove him." No one moves. The nearest guard touches his earpiece, listens to something, then deliberately looks away from the stage. His partner does the same. All four security personnel suddenly find the walls fascinating. Attention carefully directed anywhere except the man holding a microphone and speaking truths that should have been interrupted by now. Something has shifted in the room's power structure. Caelum can feel it without understanding it. The way air pressure changes before storms, invisible but undeniable. Across the room, the Valmeri triplet who made eye contact earlier removes something from his jacket pocket. Not a weapon. Too small, too rectangular. A phone? Black and expensive looking. He sets it on the table in front of him with the deliberate care someone might use placing a chess piece that signals checkmate in 3 moves. His brothers perform identical actions at their respective tables. 3 phones, placed simultaneously, screens dark but present. Varric sees them. Color drains from his face in stages, blood evacuating skin until he looks carved from wax. "What did you?" He starts, spinning toward the nearest triplet. "Nothing yet," the man replies without raising his voice. The words carry anyway, cutting through ambient noise with the precision of a blade designed for surgery. "But the security contract for this venue transferred to our firm this morning. Seemed prudent given the guest list included individuals with documented histories of coercive behavior." The statement lands soft and devastating. No accusations, no threats. Just information delivered in a tone that suggests paperwork has already been filed, signatures collected, systems rerouted through channels Varric can't access or reverse. Varric's hand drops from where it had been reaching for Caelum. He takes a step backward, nearly misses the stage edge, catches himself with visible effort. His eyes dart between the triplets, calculating distances, odds, routes of escape that aren't there. "You can't," he begins. "We haven't," another triplet interrupts, this one seated near the room's center. "We've simply ensured that existing security protocols are enforced appropriately. For everyone's safety." The phrasing is careful, plausibly deniable. They haven't touched Varric, haven't physically prevented anything, haven't done anything that would constitute assault or kidnapping or any charge a lawyer could leverage. They've just changed who controls the armed personnel in the room. Infrastructure, Caelum realizes. Not rescue. They've rewired the building's nervous system. His grip on the microphone loosens. The adrenaline that carried him through the speech is starting to metabolize into tremors. His body catching up to what his mouth already did. The stage feels less stable, or maybe that's his legs deciding they've had enough of holding weight. Guests begin talking. Murmurs building into conversations, phones lowering as people process what they've witnessed. Some look uncomfortable, others intrigued. A few already typing with the focused intensity of people composing social media posts that will be live before dessert plates are cleared. Varric backs up another step, then another. His hand moves to his jacket pocket, extracts his own phone with fingers that shake despite visible efforts at control. He looks at the screen, and whatever he sees there drains the remaining color from his face. The third triplet, the one farthest from the stage, speaks without standing. "Your board received an interesting email approximately 4 minutes ago. Anonymous tip regarding foundation grant management practices. Contracts that violate fair labor standards. Financial entanglements that create coercive environments." "You have no proof," Varric says, but the words lack conviction. "We have documentation," the first triplet corrects, still seated, still calm. "Copies of contracts. Recorded conversations. Pattern evidence spanning 3 years and 17 grant recipients. All compiled and delivered to appropriate oversight bodies who take such things seriously." Varric's phone buzzes. Then again. Then continuously, vibrating with incoming notifications that make his hand shake harder. Caelum sets the microphone back on its stand. The click echoes in space that's gone quiet again. Everyone listening, everyone watching as power redistributes itself through channels that don't require violence to function. I didn't ask you to do this, Caelum says, looking at the nearest triplet. The man meets his eyes with an expression that reveals nothing. You didn't need to ask. Systems that enable abuse require dismantling regardless of individual requests. If someone rewrote your entire life in 4 minutes, would you thank them or run? Varric leaves through the side exit. No announcement, no final words. Just a man moving with the stiff urgency of someone whose phone won't stop buzzing with messages he doesn't want to read. Security doesn't stop him. The triplets don't follow. He simply removes himself from the room like smoke dissipating when windows open, and the space he occupied refills with ambient noise that seems louder for his absence. Caelum descends the stage on legs that threaten mutiny. His hand finds the railing by instinct more than sight, fingers gripping metal that grounds him against vertigo, threatening to collapse his remaining composure. The 3 steps down feel longer than the climb up, each one requiring conscious effort to navigate without stumbling. No one applauds. The silence carries weight that feels worse than judgment. Uncertainty, discomfort, the collective processing of witnesses trying to reconcile what they filmed with what they're willing to remember. Phones lower gradually, screens going dark one by one as guests realize they've captured something that could implicate them in an action. The nearest triplet stands. Not abruptly, the motion is controlled, deliberate, drawing no more attention than necessary. He buttons his jacket with the precision of someone completing a ritual that signals transition between states, then walks towards Caelum with footsteps that sound exactly like his brother's would despite distance and carpet muffling. Caelum tracks his approach while trying to look anywhere else. His eyes catch on a woman adjusting her necklace, a man suddenly fascinated by his dessert plate, a waiter frozen near the kitchen doors holding a tray at an angle that suggests he's forgotten what he was supposed to do with it. The triplet stops just outside comfortable conversation distance. Close enough to speak without raising his voice, far enough to avoid crowding. His face maintains that carved neutrality. Not cold exactly, but containing emotion behind infrastructure Caelum can't penetrate. My name is Dante Valmeri, he says. My brothers are Matteo and Luca. We own the security firm that now holds the contract for this venue, along with 17 other properties your ex frequents for foundation business. Caelum's throat works around responses that won't form. His scalp still throbs where Varric pulled his hair, the pain settling into a dull ache that pulses with his heartbeat. Why? He finally manages. Because systems that enable coercion need replacement, not repair. Dante's tone suggests he's explaining construction logistics, rather than discussing what just happened. The Foundation's grant structure violates multiple fair labor standards. Mandatory event attendance without compensation beyond living stipends creates conditions indistinguishable from indentured servitude. That's not philanthropy. It's exploitation with tax benefits. The words land with the weight of someone who's studied the problem from angles Caelum hasn't had time to calculate. His mouth tastes like copper and champagne, stomach churning with adrenaline that has nowhere left to go. You investigated him, Caelum says. Not a question. We investigated the Foundation's operational practices after noticing patterns in port labor contracts they influenced. Your situation became visible during that review. Dante pauses, glances toward where his brothers remain seated. We don't intervene in personal relationships. We address structural vulnerabilities that allow abuse to function systematically. The distinction feels important, though Caelum can't quite grasp why through the fog coating his thoughts. His hands won't stop shaking, tremors that start in his fingers and radiate through his arms until his shoulders twitch with the effort of staying still. I need to sit, he says, voice coming out smaller than intended. Dante gestures toward a table near the room's edge, away from the main crowd. They walk there together, not side by side but with Dante trailing slightly behind in a configuration that gives Caelum space to move without feeling hurted. The table is empty, place settings untouched, as though it was kept vacant for specific purpose. Caelum sinks into a chair before his legs give out. The seat is leather and probably costs more than his monthly rent, supportive in ways that feel absurd given everything else. He drops his face into his hands, presses palms against closed eyes until pressure spots bloom in the darkness. What happens now? The question scrapes out muffled by his hands. That depends. Dante remains standing, hands loose at his sides. The Foundation will receive formal notification of investigation into grant management practices tomorrow morning. The board will likely suspend operations pending review. Your contract becomes void under coercion clauses once the findings are documented. Caelum lifts his head. So I'm unemployed. You're released from an illegal agreement. Dante's expression doesn't change, but something in his voice shifts. Not warmer exactly, but less mechanical. We'll ensure you maintain housing and insurance through the transition. Consider it compensation for the Foundation's violations of your labor rights. I don't want your charity. It's not charity. It's minimum compliance with employment law they should have followed initially. The distinction makes Caelum's head hurt worse. He slumps back in the chair, letting leather support weight he doesn't want to carry anymore. Around them, the event is dissolving. Guests gathering coats, making excuses, filtering toward exits with the urgent casualness of people who need to leave before something else happens they'll be called to account for witnessing. Matteo and Luca approach from their respective positions, movement synchronized in a way that suggests long practice coordinating across distance. They flank Dante with the same careful spacing, creating a wall of identical faces that should feel threatening but somehow doesn't. All three watch Caelum with that calculated neutrality, assessing without judging. The documentation goes public in 48 hours, Luca says, or maybe Matteo. Caelum can't distinguish their voices yet. That gives you time to decide how visible you want to be in this. 3 other grant recipients have already agreed to testify. The other adds, your participation isn't required for the case to proceed, but your statement tonight will be circulating by morning. Caelum's stomach drops. He'd forgotten the phones, the recording, the way everything he said is now digital evidence being shared across platforms he doesn't control. His face will be attached to accusations that will follow him through search results and background checks for years. I'm screwed, he whispers. You're positioned, Dante corrects. If you want to be, there's infrastructure we can provide: legal representation, media strategy, employment protection. Or we can ensure you disappear from the narrative entirely. Your choice. The offer hangs in air thick with implications Caelum is too exhausted to parse. His brain feels like static, thoughts fragmenting before they complete. He needs sleep, needs water, needs to be somewhere that isn't this ballroom with its marble and cameras and witnesses who watched him dragged by his hair and did nothing. Why do you care? The question comes out sharper than intended. Dante exchanges glances with his brothers. Silent communication that takes seconds. When he looks back at Caelum, his expression has settled into something that might be the edge of honest. Because abuse functions through infrastructure, contracts, employment policies, financial dependencies. We build infrastructure. We understand how it's weaponized. So this is professional interest. This is expertise applied appropriately. The answer doesn't satisfy, but Caelum lacks energy to push further. His phone buzzes in his pocket. Probably messages he doesn't want to read. Notifications from people who've already seen clips of his speech. Questions he can't answer yet. He ignores it. One of the triplets, Matteo maybe, produces a business card from inside his jacket. Plain black with silver text, just a name and phone number, nothing else. He sets it on the table in front of Caelum with the same precision his brother used with cufflinks earlier. Think about it, he says. We'll handle the immediate fallout regardless. But long-term infrastructure requires your input. They leave together, moving in coordinated silence toward the exit. Caelum watches them go while his phone continues buzzing. The card sitting on white linen like evidence of something he hasn't decided whether to trust yet. The ballroom empties. Waiters begin clearing tables, collecting discarded phones and half-finished champagne glasses. Someone turns off the stage lights. Normal operations resuming as though nothing happened. as though the floor isn't still marked by whatever Caelum just walked through. His phone goes silent, then vibrates once. Long buzz that signals voicemail rather than text. He pulls it out, unlocks it, navigates to messages that make his vision blur. 43 texts, 17 missed calls, social media notifications multiplying too fast to count. His speech is already trending under 3 different hashtags he didn't create. And at the bottom, most recent, one message from a number not in his contacts. Check your foundation email. Board meeting called for tomorrow noon. You'll want representation. No signature. But Caelum knows without checking that the number matches what's printed on the card still sitting untouched on the table. His email notification blinks red in the corner of his screen. If the choice between disappearing and fighting back was yours, which would you pick? The article goes live at 6 in the morning. Caelum wakes to his phone vibrating off the nightstand, the sound of plastic hitting hardwood pulling him from dreams that taste like champagne and marble. He reaches for it with eyes still half closed, muscle memory navigating the familiar motion, then freezes when he sees the screen. 237 notifications. The number climbs while he watches 243, 251, increasing too fast to track individual additions. His thumb hovers over the screen, pressure building behind his ribs that has nothing to do with how little he slept. The hotel room around him is generic and expensive. Neutral walls, corporate art, furniture designed to be inoffensive, paid for by the Valmeri brothers through methods they explained as interim housing assistance pending foundation contract resolution. He'd accepted because the alternative was returning to Verek's apartment where the locks only worked from outside. The top notification is a news alert. Metropolitan Arts Foundation under investigation for labor exploitation. The headline sits in bold text that seems too permanent, too real, words that will exist in search engines and archives long after this moment passes. Caelum opens it. The article loads in sections, text first, then images that make his stomach contract. Photos from last night's event, angles captured by phones he remembers seeing lift but hadn't processed through the panic. His face fills the screen mid-speech, mouth open, eyes wide with something between terror and defiance. The image quality is sharp enough to see individual strands of hair disheveled from Verek's grip. Below that, Verek entering the venue, hand possessive against Caelum's back. The body language reads differently now that context exists, pressure visible in the way Caelum's shoulders hunch forward despite attempts to appear relaxed. The article text scrolls beneath the photos, professional journalism citing anonymous sources and documentation reviewed by this publication. Names redacted, specific allegations couched in careful language that avoids libel while making implications clear. Foundation grant contracts described as potentially coercive. Event attendance requirements labeled concerning patterns of control. 3 other grant recipients quoted anonymously. Their stories mirror Caelum's with variations, isolation tactics, financial dependency, mandatory appearances framed as professional development. One mentions locked doors. Another describes having their cell phone access restricted for focus purposes. Caelum's throat closes around air that suddenly feels insufficient. He'd thought it was just him. Thought maybe he was too sensitive, too dramatic, reading malice into systems that were merely strict. The documentation makes it undeniable Verek had refined abuse into administrative policy, scaled personal cruelty into organizational practice. His phone buzzes with an incoming call. Unknown number. He declines it. Immediately another call. Different unknown number. He puts the phone on silent and watches it light up with calls he won't answer, messages accumulating too fast to read. The counter climbs past 300 notifications. 350. 400. Someone knocks on the hotel room door. Caelum's body goes rigid, every muscle locking in preparation for threat. His eyes track to the door. Solid wood with a security chain he'd checked twice before sleeping, but don't move otherwise. The knock comes again, polite but persistent, followed by a voice he recognizes. It's Dante. I brought breakfast. Caelum drags himself vertical, joints protesting from a night spent tensed against mattress that was too soft to feel safe. He crosses to the door, checks the peephole out of habit, sees Dante standing in the hallway holding a paper bag and coffee carrier. Alone. No visible weapons. The chain rattles when Caelum releases it. The deadbolt clicks. He opens the door 6 inches, enough to confirm Dante is actually alone, then wider to permit entry. Dante steps inside with the careful movements of someone entering another person's space without invitation. He sets the bag and coffee on the desk near the window, then turns to face Caelum with that same neutral expression that gives nothing away. "You've seen it," he says. Not a question. Caelum nods because words require more energy than he has available. His phone continues buzzing silently on the nightstand, screen lighting up in rhythm with incoming notifications. The response has been significant. Dante continues, pulling containers from the bag with efficient motions, mostly supportive. Some outlets are attempting to frame it as personal vendetta, but the documentation is comprehensive enough to prevent that narrative from gaining traction. "I regret it." The admission scrapes out before Caelum can stop it. Dante pauses mid-motion, a container of what looks like scrambled eggs halfway between bag and desk. "Why?" "Because now everyone knows." Caelum gestures vaguely at his phone, the room, the situation that extends beyond physical space. "I'm the Omega who got dragged across a ballroom by his hair. That's what I'll be. Forever. In every search result, every background check, every conversation with people who recognize my face. You're the Omega who spoke when it was dangerous to speak." Dante sets down the eggs, turns to face Caelum fully. "There's a difference. Not to hiring managers. Perhaps not. But there are other frameworks for measuring worth beyond employability in systems that enabled your abuse." The response is too logical, too removed from the reality of needing to pay rent and buy food and exist in a world that reduces people to search results. Caelum's hands curl into fists at his sides, nails digging crescents into palms. "I almost wish I'd stayed silent," he whispers. Dante's expression shifts fractionally, something that might be the edge of understanding crossing features designed to conceal reaction. That's a normal response to visibility. The consequences of silence would have compounded over years. The consequences of speaking will diminish over time as new stories replace yours in public attention. You can't know that. I can calculate probabilities based on pattern analysis. Would you like to see the data? The offer is sincere, delivered in a tone that suggests Dante actually has spreadsheets supporting his claim. Caelum almost laughs, except the sound that emerges resembles choking more than humor. His phone lights up again. This time a text from a number he recognizes. Another grant recipient, someone he'd met briefly at a foundation event months ago. The preview shows just the first line. "Thank you for speaking. I couldn't." Caelum picks up the phone, opens the full message. "Thank you for speaking. I couldn't do it alone, but now I don't have to. 3 of us are meeting with lawyers tomorrow. Will you join?" The words blur as his eyes fill with water he won't let fall. His thumb hovers over the keyboard, cursor blinking in the reply field, but forming responses requires cognitive function currently offline. "Eat," Dante says, pushing the egg container closer. Decision-making suffers under caloric deficit. "Is everything infrastructure to you?" "Most things, yes." Caelum sets down his phone and picks up the eggs instead. They taste like nothing, or maybe his taste buds have joined his other senses in shutdown. He chews mechanically, swallows, repeats. Dante watches without comment, drinking coffee that steams in the morning light filtering through hotel curtains. The silence stretches, comfortable in its lack of demand. Caelum finishes half the eggs before his stomach rebels, pushing the container away with more force than necessary. Dante doesn't push him to eat more. "The board meeting is at noon," Dante says eventually. "You're not required to attend. We can represent your interests without your physical presence." "Will Varric be there?" "Unknown. His legal counsel will likely advise against it given pending investigations." The thought of seeing Varric again makes Caelum's skin tighten, sweat prickling along his spine despite the room's temperature control. His scalp aches phantom pain where hair was pulled, body remembering trauma through cellular memory that won't listen to logic. I don't want to go, he says. Then don't. Dante's response carries no judgment. Your participation is optional. The infrastructure proceeds regardless. There's that word again. Infrastructure. Systems, frameworks, mechanisms that function independent of individual input. Caelum wants to find it cold, wants to resent the reduction of his situation to logistics and probability calculations. But underneath the clinical language lives something that feels like stability, predictable, reliable, less likely to shift based on emotional volatility. What happens if I disappear? The question emerges quiet, testing. You maintain housing and insurance through the transition period. Legal representation ensures the foundation doesn't pursue retaliation. Documentation goes forward without your name attached to testimony. You become anonymous within the case structure. And if I stay visible? Dante's expression does something complicated, calculation mixing with what might be respect. Then you become infrastructure. Your story creates framework for other victims to utilize. The visibility serves purpose beyond individual catharsis. The choice sits heavy between them, neither option clearly better, both carrying consequences Caelum lacks energy to fully process. His phone buzzes again. Another message, another call, another notification that someone somewhere has an opinion about his life that will be shared publicly without his consent. He thinks about the 3 other grant recipients willing to testify. Thinks about the message thanking him for speaking first. Thinks about spending the rest of his life wondering if silence would have been safer while knowing other people suffered because he chose personal protection over collective action. I want 24 hours, he says. Dante nods once. You have them. When would staying silent cost more than speaking ever could? The office smells like leather and old money. Caelum sits in a chair designed for powerful people, spine straight against ergonomic support that feels wrong for his body, hands gripping armrests upholstered in material that probably costs more per square inch than his art supplies. The Valmeri brothers' headquarters occupies 3 floors of a building with views that turn Manhattan into a scale model, distance rendering everything small and manageable. Dante sits across from him behind a desk of dark wood that gleams under recessed lighting. Matteo and Luca flank the room's edges, present without crowding, creating that triangle configuration that seems to be their default arrangement. All 3 wear identical suits in charcoal gray, shirts white, ties absent. Professional without being corporate. We don't protect individuals, Dante says, leaning back with fingers steepled. We reinforce systems. The statement lands with weight Caelum is still learning to interpret. He'd arrived 15 minutes ago after spending his 24 hours thinking in circles that led nowhere conclusive. His decision to come here instead of disappearing suggests something, but he's not certain what yet. I don't understand the difference, he admits. Matteo speaks from his position near the window. Protection implies ongoing dependency. Someone needs defending. Another person provides defense. The relationship persists through continued vulnerability. System reinforcement creates infrastructure that functions without individual intervention. Luca adds from the opposite wall. Laws that prevent exploitation. Contract standards that eliminate coercive clauses. Oversight mechanisms that make abuse costly enough to discourage. Their voices are nearly identical, same pitch, same rhythm, which should be disorienting but instead creates odd comfort in consistency. Caelum's brain struggles to attach names to faces that refuse to differentiate, eventually giving up and treating them as 3 expressions of the same entity. You're saying you want to change policy, not rescue me specifically. Correct. Dante's fingers tap once against each other, precise percussion. Your situation provided documentation for patterns we'd observed across multiple foundations using similar contract structures. Addressing those structures helps numerous people, not just you. The logic makes sense but feels cold in ways Caelum can't articulate. He shifts in the expensive chair, trying to find position that doesn't make him feel like he's being evaluated for worth measured in utility rather than humanity. What do you need from me? Testimony if you're willing. Your statement from the event is already public, but detailed documentation of contract enforcement, isolation tactics, financial control mechanisms would strengthen the case for regulatory intervention. Caelum's stomach tightens. That means going through everything again, remembering, explaining to lawyers and investigators who'll ask questions designed to find holes in my story. Yes, no sugarcoating, no reassurance that it won't be hard. Just confirmation that the process will be exactly as uncomfortable as Caelum fears. He stands because sitting feels like agreement he hasn't given yet. His legs carry him to the window where Matteo makes space without actually moving, somehow creating distance through subtle weight redistribution. The view stretches impossibly far, buildings stacking into skyline, rivers silver in afternoon light, bridges connecting landmasses that look close enough to touch from this height. What if I say no? The question comes out quieter than intended. Then we proceed with documentation from other sources. Matteo answers from beside him. Your participation strengthens but isn't essential. 3 other grant recipients have already agreed to testify. Foundation financial records are being subpoenaed. The investigation continues regardless. The information should feel like relief, escape route available, choice genuinely optional, but instead sits uncomfortable in Caelum's chest. He thinks about the message thanking him for speaking first, about people who needed someone else to take the risk before they could follow. If I do this, what happens after? He keeps his eyes on the window, on distance that makes details disappear. When the investigation ends and lawyers move to other cases, what's left? Silence stretches long enough that Caelum turns to find all 3 brothers exchanging glances that communicate something he can't parse. Dante leans forward, forearms on desk, expression shifting into something less contained. We're establishing an advocacy initiative, he says. Legal aid fund specifically for people escaping coercive employment contracts. You could run it if you wanted. Lead case review, hire advocates, develop support structures. Caelum's breath catches. Why would you offer that to me? Because infrastructure requires people who understand what it's protecting against. Luca moves from his wall position, approaching with hands visible and empty. You've lived inside exploitative systems. That perspective is valuable for designing alternatives. I'm not qualified. I'm an artist, not a... You're qualified by experience, Dante interrupts. Credentials can be acquired. Understanding can't be taught to people who've never needed it. The offer hangs in air that smells like leather and possibility. Caelum's hands shake. Subtle tremor he hopes isn't visible from across the room. His brain cycles through objections. Too visible, too much responsibility, too likely to fail spectacularly and publicly. But underneath the fear sits something else. Curiosity maybe, or recognition that the choice between disappearing and building something carries weight his future self will have to live with. I need specifics. The words come out steadier than he feels. Funding structure, reporting requirements, autonomy levels. I won't trade one controlling contract for another. Matteo produces a folder from seemingly nowhere, setting it on Dante's desk with the precise placement that seems characteristic of their movements. Proposed framework. 3-year grant, renewable based on outcomes rather than compliance metrics. You maintain hiring authority, case selection criteria, operational decisions. We provide capital and legal infrastructure, not direction. Caelum approaches the desk, picks up the folder with hands that still shake. The document inside runs 12 pages, dense text outlining funding sources, governance structures, accountability mechanisms. He scans headers without processing details, brain stuck on the implications more than specifics. This is real, he says. Not a question, more like testing how the words sound spoken aloud.
Yes. Dante's voice carries certainty that should feel reassuring, but instead highlights how uncertain Caelum feels about everything. He flips through pages, pausing on section headers, board composition, director authority, conflict resolution procedures. The language reads carefully, power distributed through checks rather than concentrated, decisions requiring consensus rather than unilateral control. It looks like everything he wished existed when he was signing Varek's foundation contract without understanding what he was agreeing to. What if I'm terrible at this? The admission scrapes out vulnerable and small. Then we adjust systems until you're not. Luca's response lacks judgment, presenting failure as a solvable problem rather than personal inadequacy. Infrastructure adapts. That's what makes it effective. Caelum closes the folder, sets it back on the desk, presses palms flat against wood grain that feels cool and solid. His reflection stares back from polished surface, distorted, vague, more suggestion than image. He looks tired, scared. Younger than 27 has any right to feel. I need to think about it, he says. You have 72 hours. Dante stands, extends his hand across the desk. After that, we'll need commitment either way. The investigation moves forward regardless, but the advocacy initiative requires leadership decisions soon. Caelum shakes his hand because not doing so would be rude, feels calluses against his palm that surprise him given the expensive suits and corner office. Working hands, not decorative ones. The grip is firm without being crushing, releases promptly without lingering. Say no if you want to remain small, Dante adds as Caelum turns to leave. The statement stops him 3 feet from the door. He pivots, finds all 3 brothers watching with that calculated attention that feels like measurement. What's that supposed to mean? Exactly what it sounds like. Staying invisible is valid self-protection, but it's also choosing limitation over expansion. Neither option is wrong, but only one builds infrastructure that outlasts individual survival. The words follow Caelum into the elevator, through the lobby, onto streets that feel too bright after the office's controlled lighting. His phone buzzes. Message from the other grant recipients confirming tomorrow's meeting with lawyers. He responds affirmative before his brain finishes processing the decision. That night he dreams of stages and microphones, of speaking words that echo through marble halls long after his voice stops. When he wakes, the folder from Dante's office sits on the hotel nightstand where he left it. 12 pages. 3-year commitment. Choice that feels impossible to make and equally impossible to avoid. His phone shows 47 hours remaining until the deadline. If someone offered you power, would you be brave enough to take it? The conference room smells like fear and old coffee. Caelum sits between 2 other grant recipients, Amara on his left, Rashad on his right. Facing 3 lawyers whose names he's already forgotten despite introductions 5 minutes ago. The table stretches long enough to feel like distance, surface cluttered with documents and recording devices that red lights signal are active. His hands rest flat on wood that's cheaper than the Valmeri brothers' office furniture, less polished, marked by years of similar meetings where people describe trauma to strangers paid to document suffering. The lead lawyer, woman in her 50s with gray threading through short locks, arranges papers with efficient movements. Let's start with contract terms, specifically the mandatory attendance clauses. Caelum, you mentioned in your initial statement that refusing events meant forfeiting your grant. His throat works around words that stick. Section 7C, required presence at donor functions, fundraisers, select private events. Missing one without 14 days written notice meant breach of contract. And the notice had to be approved by Varek, who was also the foundation director. So basically he decided what counted as valid reasons. The lawyer makes notes in shorthand Caelum can't decipher. Her assistant types on a laptop that click-clacks, steady rhythm underlying the conversation. Everything is being recorded, documented, transformed from lived experience into evidence that will be filed in systems designed to reduce people to case numbers. Amara speaks up, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. He isolated us systematically, not obvious enough to call it abuse, but structured so we couldn't build support networks outside foundation connections. Can you provide examples? The second lawyer leans forward, expression-neutral professional interest. Phone calls monitored through foundation lines. Social events required his attendance or pre-approval. Moving out of foundation-approved housing meant losing studio access. Everything was connected, so you couldn't extract one piece without the whole structure collapsing. Rashad adds his experience. Financial controls that created dependency, reputation management that made questioning Varek professionally dangerous, contract clauses that prevented discussing foundation practices with outside parties under threat of legal action for breach of confidentiality. The pattern emerges clear and damning. What looked like individual cases of abuse revealed as systematized operation, refined over years into efficient exploitation machinery. Caelum's chest tightens, listening to their stories echo his own. He'd thought it was personal, something broken in him that attracted Varek's control. Hearing the same tactics applied to others strips away that interpretation, leaves only the infrastructure of harm designed to function independent of individual victims. Why didn't you report earlier? The third lawyer asked the question gently, but it still lands like accusation. Silence fills space for 3 seconds before Caelum answers. Because reporting meant losing everything. Housing, insurance, studio space, professional connections. And who would believe us against someone with Varek's reputation? Foundation board members are city officials, museum directors, people who matter. We were just grant recipients who should have been grateful. Are you grateful? The lawyer's face reveals nothing, but the question carries weight. No, the word comes out hard. I'm angry it took getting dragged by my hair on camera for anyone to care. The recording devices capture his tone, sharp edges that don't smooth even when he notices how aggressive he sounds. He doesn't take it back, doesn't apologize for volume or emotion. The lawyers make more notes. They break for lunch Caelum can't eat. His stomach has twisted into configuration that rejects food, anxiety manifesting as nausea that won't settle. Amara and Rashad talk quietly near the window while he stays at the table, staring at documents that outline next steps, depositions, board hearings, potential criminal investigation if evidence warrants. You okay? Rashad asks, returning with coffee that steams in cheap styrofoam. Define okay. Fair point. He sits, slides the coffee towards Caelum. This is the right thing, though. What we're doing, even if it feels terrible. Caelum wraps hands around the cup without drinking. Heat seeps through foam, grounding against the dissociation, threatening to pull him sideways. Does it get easier? Talking about it. Not easier. More familiar, maybe. Like the story stops being something that happened to you and becomes something you're using as tool. Rashad pauses, sips his own coffee. The Valmeri brothers approach me too. About that advocacy thing. You gonna do it? Thinking about it. Scared of being that visible, though. People already recognize my face from the articles. Had someone at the grocery store ask if I was that Omega from the Foundation case. Like I'm defined by worst thing that happened to me. The complaint resonates through Caelum's chest, echoing fears he hasn't voiced yet. What did you tell them? That I'm still deciding. Same as you probably. Rashad sets down his coffee with the care of someone handling breakable objects. But I keep thinking about the messages. People thanking us for speaking, saying they're leaving similar situations because seeing us survive made it possible. Before Caelum can respond, the lawyers return. Afternoon session focuses on documentation, texts, emails, financial records they'll need to gather. The list grows overwhelming. Hundreds of pieces of evidence required to build case strong enough to survive legal challenges from Foundation attorneys who charge rates none of them could afford. By 4 o'clock, Caelum's brain feels scraped raw. Every question extracting memories he'd prefer stayed buried. His voice has gone hoarse from talking, throat dry despite the coffee and water. When the lawyers finally declare the session complete, relief floods so intense it nearly buckles his knees standing. Outside the building, Amara lights a cigarette with shaking hands. Well, that was traumatic. Understatement, Rashad mutters. Caelum leans against brick wall, letting rough texture ground him through jacket fabric. Do you think it matters? Everything we just told them. Has to. Amara exhales smoke that dissipates into afternoon air. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? His phone buzzes. Text from Dante. Board meeting concluded. Foundation operations suspended pending investigation. Housing and insurance secured for all affected grant recipients. You have 26 hours remaining for decision on advocacy initiative. Caelum shows the message to the others. They read in silence, faces cycling through expressions he recognizes: relief, anxiety, uncertainty about what comes next. "I'm going to do it," he says before his brain approves the words. The advocacy thing. If they'll still have me after I spent the last week panicking. Amara stubs out her cigarette. Then I'm in too. Someone needs to keep you from making it too clinical. Rashad laughs, rough and genuine. Guess that makes 3. We're probably idiots, but at least we're idiots together. They exchange contact information that's actually theirs. Not foundation monitored, not filtered through Varek's oversight. Real numbers that connect to phones they control, email addresses that don't route through systems designed to track their communication. Walking back to the hotel, Caelum composes a message to Dante. 3 words: "I accept. Let's build." The response comes before he reaches the lobby. Monday, 9 a.m. Bring your questions. That night, he sleeps without dreaming. When he wakes, 23 emails wait requesting interviews about his testimony. He deletes them all except one. Small podcast focusing on labor rights in creative industries. The host's message reads professionally curious rather than sensationalist hungry. He responds with conditions, pre-approved questions, no video recording, conversation framed as policy discussion rather than personal trauma exploitation. The host agrees. Sunday evening, Caelum sits across from a microphone that's cheaper than the one he grabbed at the feast, talks for 40 minutes about contract law and structural coercion and the difference between individual rescue and systemic change. His voice stays steady. The host asks smart questions. Nobody mentions his hair getting pulled. When the episode releases Tuesday, it trends in labor policy circles rather than gossip feeds. Small infrastructure. But infrastructure. Would you burn your old life if you knew something better waited on the other side? The hearing room holds 30 people and feels like 300. Caelum sits in the 3rd row between Amara and Rashad, hands gripping the chair arms while board members file to their elevated seats behind a long table that creates physical hierarchy. The foundation logo hangs behind them, elegant script promising cultural enrichment, words that taste like ash knowing what they covered. Varek sits in the front row with 2 attorneys flanking him like expensive armor. He hasn't looked back once since Caelum arrived, spine rigid, shoulders squared in defensive posture that reads as confidence to anyone not trained to see control mechanisms failing. The board chair, elderly woman whose family name appears on museum wings, calls the session to order with a gavel that sounds too loud in the carpeted space. We're here to address allegations of improper grant administration practices and to review documentation submitted by complainants and investigating parties. Caelum's lawyer stands, introduces herself with credentials that span 2 decades of labor rights litigation. She moves to the presentation screen, pulls up the first document, Caelum's contract with Section 7C highlighted in yellow that glows under overhead lights. Mandatory attendance clauses, she begins, voice carrying courtroom authority into administrative hearing, combined with financial dependency structures and housing contingencies, create conditions legally indistinguishable from indentured servitude. Varek's attorney objects, semantics about voluntary agreements, sophisticated parties entering contracts with full knowledge. The board chair allows the objection, directs Caelum's lawyer to rephrase. These contracts exploit power imbalances to extract compliance through coercion rather than compensation. Better. The board members lean forward, reading highlighted sections that suddenly look different when framed as exploitation rather than professional standards. Testimony begins. Amara speaks first, voice steady despite visible trembling in her hands. She describes isolation tactics. How foundation housing kept grant recipients separated from non-approved social networks. How communication monitoring created atmosphere where every conversation felt surveilled. How financial structures prevented saving money that might enable escape. Rashad follows with documentation. Emails showing Varek's approval required for basic decisions. changing housing, attending non-foundation events, speaking with press about their work. Text messages demonstrating consequences for non-compliance. Threats of grant termination, professional reputation destruction, legal action for contract breach. Then it's Caelum's turn. He stands on legs that threaten mutiny, walks to the witness table, sits in a chair that's been molded by previous people testifying about their own systematic harm. The microphone stands between him and the board, amplifying his breathing into something that sounds too loud, too fast. The board chair asks him to state his name in relationship to the foundation. Caelum Rivers, grant recipient from June 2023 through February 2025. Also, his voice catches, swallow audible through the microphone. Also former partner of Varric Santoro. Murmurs ripple through the audience. Varric's shoulders tighten fractionally, the only indication he's listening. Can you describe the nature of that relationship? The board chair's voice stays neutral professional, but her eyes carry something that might be sympathy. It started as professional mentorship. He selected my work for exhibition, offered guidance on career development. The romantic relationship began approximately 3 months later. Around the same time, I signed a foundation grant agreement. And the relationship ended when? It didn't. Not officially. I attempted to leave multiple times, but the contract structure made that financially impossible. Housing was foundation provided. Insurance was foundation funded. Studio access depended on grant continuation. Leaving him meant losing everything simultaneously. Caelum's lawyer project's another document. The housing agreement showing Varric as both personal landlord and professional foundation director, dual roles creating conflict of interest that trapped Caelum between categories. On February 3rd, the lawyer continues, you attended a mandatory foundation event where Mr. Santoro physically assaulted you in front of approximately 80 witnesses. Can you describe what happened? The memory surfaces with clarity that feels cruel. Caelum's hand moves to his scalp without conscious direction, fingers touching hair that's grown back normal but still remembers. He called me to the stage under guise of reconciliation speech. When I refused, he grabbed my hair and dragged me forward. The physical assault was brief but captured on multiple phones. What the videos don't show is the years of coercion that made that moment possible. The contract that forced my attendance. The financial dependency that prevented me leaving early. The isolation that ensured no one in that room would intervene because intervention might damage their foundation relationships. Silence stretches thick enough to feel solid. Board members exchange glances that communicate more than words, recognition spreading that they've been implicated in systems they authorized without understanding consequences. Varric's attorney stands. Objection. This is characterizing a private relationship dispute as institutional failure. It's both. Caelum's response comes before his lawyer can object to the objection. And calling it private ignores how the foundation structure enabled abuse to function systematically across multiple grant recipients. The board chair allows the statement. Varric's attorney sits with visible frustration. More documentation follows. Financial records showing how stipends were calculated to prevent savings accumulation. Housing agreements containing termination clauses that could be triggered without notice. Communication policies that violated labor law by restricting grant recipients' rights to discuss working conditions. 3 hours into the hearing, the board calls recess. Caelum escapes to the hallway where his hands shake badly enough that Amara has to open his water bottle. Rashad stands.
Watch near the doors, monitoring for Varric or his attorneys who might attempt contact during break. You're doing great, Amara says, voice low and fierce. Watching you up there, staying calm while describing that. It matters. They're listening. Caelum leans against the wall, lets cool surface ground him through shirt fabric. Does it matter, though? They could decide the contracts were technically legal even if ethically wrong. Issue recommendations without consequences. Then we keep building. Rashad returns from his guard position. The advocacy initiative launches regardless. The Valmeri brothers aren't waiting for permission to create alternative structures. When the hearing resumes, the board chair announces they've reviewed documentation during recess. Her expression has shifted from neutral professional to something harder, more resolved. This board moves to suspend Foundation operations effective immediately pending comprehensive external audit. All current grant agreements are void under coercion clauses. Recipients will receive housing and insurance continuation through independent administrator. Mr. Santoro is removed from all Foundation positions and barred from future involvement in arts funding organizations pending criminal investigation outcomes. Varric stands. You can't. We can and have. The board chair's voice cuts through his objection with authority that allows no argument. Your employment is terminated for cause. Security will escort you from the premises. 2 security officers materialize. Not the Foundation's usual staff but contractors Caelum recognizes from the feast. Valmeri employees, present through infrastructure that was rerouted weeks ago in preparation for exactly this moment. Varric's face cycles through expressions too fast to catalog. Shock, anger, calculation, fear. He opens his mouth for response that dies when he realizes the room is united against him. His attorneys gather papers with efficient movements that suggest they knew this outcome was possible, maybe even likely. As security escorts him toward the exit, Varric finally looks back. His eyes find Caelum across rows of chairs and witnesses and documentation of harm. For 3 seconds they maintain contact that carries weight of history neither will forget but only one will move past. Then Varric is gone, and the room exhales collectively. The board chair addresses remaining audience. The Foundation will restructure under external oversight with grant recipient representation on the board. Policies will be rewritten to eliminate coercive structures. This organization failed its mission by enabling abuse. That ends now. Caelum's lawyer squeezes his shoulder. You did it. But he knows better. It wasn't him alone, it was documentation, pattern evidence, infrastructure built by people who understood how systems function and how to dismantle them. Individual courage mattered, but structure was what made victory possible. Outside the hearing room, Dante waits with his brothers. They don't approach, don't offer congratulations or physical comfort. They simply stand present, 3 points of a triangle that created the framework allowing everything inside to happen. Monday, Dante says. We start building. Caelum nods, throat too tight for words. His phone buzzes with messages from people he hasn't spoken to in years. Friends who saw coverage, family members who finally understand why he disappeared. Support arriving late but arriving. That night, the advocacy initiative paperwork sits on his hotel desk. 12 pages of infrastructure waiting for leadership decision he already made but has to sign to make official. His hand steadies on the pen. Signature flows across documents that will outlast his trauma, building something that helps people he'll never meet escape situations he survived. Small infrastructure, but permanent. If you could rewrite the ending to your worst story, would the new version look like winning or healing? The ballroom looks different, full of people who chose to be here. Caelum stands near the window where 6 months ago he watched Varric pull him toward humiliation. The same marble stretches beneath his feet. The same chandeliers catch light like crystallized promises, but the space feels transformed by who occupies it now. Grant recipients from 4 different foundations, advocates who helped restructure coercive contracts, lawyers who worked pro bono because systems needed changing, and 3 identical men in charcoal suits standing at careful intervals around the room's perimeter. The Omega Legal Advocacy Initiative launches tonight with funding that doesn't demand compliance, structure that distributes power instead of concentrating it, oversight that protects rather than controls. Caelum's title is Director, word that still sits strange in his mouth but fits better each time he says it. Amara approaches with champagne she knows he won't drink but offers anyway. You good? Nervous. He accepts the glass, holds it without bringing it to his lips. What if this doesn't work? What if we're building infrastructure that fails the same way the Foundation did? Then we adjust and rebuild. Her confidence comes easier now, voice carrying authority that 6 months of advocacy work developed from raw determination. That's what we learned, right? Systems adapt or become obsolete. Rashad joins them, tablet in hand showing metric Caelum doesn't fully understand yet. 17 new cases this month requesting assistance. We're going to need additional staff sooner than projected. Hire them. Caelum's response comes automatic now, decision-making muscles that atrophied under Varroc's control slowly rebuilding through practice. Use the framework we developed for equitable compensation and clear boundaries. They discuss logistics while guests circulate through space that 6 months ago witnessed abuse and now hosts celebration. The transformation isn't complete. Caelum still tenses when people approach his back unexpectedly, still catalogs exits in every room he enters, still dissociates when crowds get too dense. Trauma doesn't evaporate because systems change. But healing happens in increments. In mornings when he wakes without panic. In conversations where he disagrees without fearing consequences. In recognition that safety isn't the absence of danger but the presence of infrastructure that makes danger manageable. Dante materializes beside him with the quiet efficiency that seems characteristic of the Valmeri brothers. "You've done well," he says, gesture encompassing the room, the initiative, the 6 months of building that brought them here. "We've done well," Caelum corrects. "This doesn't exist without the framework you provided. Infrastructure requires leadership to function. Capital and legal structure create possibility, but you made it operational. The distinction matters less than it did months ago." Caelum has learned to accept help without feeling diminished by it, to recognize that accepting resources isn't weakness when the terms are clear and power remains distributed. "Thank you," he says, simple and genuine, "for seeing pattern instead of just personal crisis, for building something that outlasts individual rescue." Dante's expression shifts fractionally. Something that might be the edge of satisfaction crossing features designed for neutrality. That's what infrastructure does. It persists. Someone calls for attention. The room quiets in gradual waves, conversations trailing into silence that feels expectant rather than tense. Caelum moves toward the front not because he has to, but because he wants to, because speaking when it mattered taught him that his voice carries weight worth using. He stands where 6 months ago Varroc stood controlling his movement. No microphone this time. The room is small enough that his voice carries naturally. Faces turned toward him with expressions ranging from curious to supportive. Cameras present but held by people documenting achievement rather than scandal. 6 months ago I was dragged across this floor by someone who confused control with care. His voice stays steady, words landing clear in space that holds them without distortion. Tonight I'm standing here by choice, leading an organization that exists because systems failed and people decided to build better ones. He pauses, lets the silence breathe. This initiative isn't about individual rescue. It's about infrastructure that makes abuse costly enough to discourage and escape accessible enough to survive. We can't prevent all harm, but we can create frameworks that make recovery possible when harm occurs. Applause builds gradually, starting from the back and rolling forward. Caelum accepts it without false modesty or excessive pride. Just recognition that the work matters and will continue mattering long after tonight ends. After speeches conclude and guests begin filtering toward exits, one of the Valmeri brothers, Matteo maybe, Caelum still struggles with identification, approaches with measured steps. "Walk with me." Not a demand, genuine question that allows refusal. They move toward the ballroom's edge, away from remaining clusters of conversation. Matteo stops near the window, looks out at Manhattan lit by evening that turns buildings into geometry of light and shadow. "You've noticed we maintain distance," he says. Not a question. "Yes." Caelum joins him at the window, keeping 18 inches between them, space that feels comfortable rather than careful. It's deliberate. The dynamic could easily shift into protection rather than partnership. You leading this initiative requires you being perceived as independent, not as extension of our organization. The explanation makes sense in ways that should feel clinical but instead registers as respect. They're protecting his authority by not claiming credit, staying present but not dominant. "I appreciate that," Caelum says. "The restraint. The trust that I can function without constant oversight. Mateo's expression does something complicated. Acknowledgement mixing with what might be approval. You've exceeded performance projections. The initiative is handling twice the caseload we estimated with better outcomes. That suggests strong leadership. It suggests good infrastructure supporting the leadership. Both can be true. They stand in comfortable silence, watching the city through glass that separates without isolating. Caelum feels the presence beside him. Not crowding, not claiming, just existing in proximity that allows contact without requiring it. Do you ever want more? The question slips out before Caelum can examine whether asking it is wise. From the work we do together. Mateo turns, meets his eyes with expression that reveals careful thought. Want is complicated when power differentials exist. You direct an organization we fund. That creates relationship complexities that require navigation. So that's a no. That's a not yet. Maybe not ever if the dynamic doesn't shift in ways that equalize access to power. But the infrastructure we're building together matters more than individual desires that could destabilize it. The answer should disappoint but instead lands as relief. Caelum has spent enough time in relationships where his wants were secondary to someone else's control. Having someone prioritize stability over personal gratification feels like care expressed through restraint. Okay, he says. I can work with that. Good. Mateo's hand moves fractionally towards Caelum's shoulder, stops, withdraws. Respecting boundaries that are still forming. Keep building. The infrastructure matters. Later, when the ballroom empties and staff begins cleanup, Caelum stands alone in the space that 6 months ago defined his worst moment. His phone shows messages from people thanking the initiative for helping them escape situations that mirrored his. Each notification represents someone who survived because infrastructure existed to catch them. He thinks about the choice that brought him here, between disappearing and fighting back, between individual safety and collective advocacy. The path he chose cost visibility he'll never fully recover. Comfort he'll always mourn losing. But it built something that outlasts his trauma, framework that helps people he'll never meet. His reflection stares back from darkened windows, less distorted than it was months ago, features settling into someone who recognizes himself despite everything that changed. The ballroom feels different now, not because the space transformed, but because he has, not rescued, rebuilt, not protected, empowered, not saved by someone stronger, but supported by infrastructure that made his own strength operational. He takes one final look at the marble, the chandeliers, the stage where he grabbed a microphone and refused to apologize. Then he leaves, walking toward the exit on legs that no longer shake, into a night that holds possibility rather than threat. Behind him, the room sits empty and waiting. Tomorrow it will host corporate events, weddings, fundraisers, life continuing in space that briefly held transformation. The walls won't remember what happened here, but the people who witnessed it will, and the infrastructure built from it persists independent of memory. Small changes compound into systems. Systems become culture. Culture determines who survives and who doesn't. Tonight, survival infrastructure exists that didn't 6 months ago. That's not rescue. That's revolution built from increments. And maybe the strongest act an Omega can choose isn't who protects him, but what he builds that outlasts the need for protection entirely. Thank you for being part of this story that shows how healing isn't always loud and victory isn't always explosive. Sometimes it's just infrastructure, quietly persisting, making tomorrow safer than yesterday was. If this resonated with you, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. These narratives matter because they show different paths through trauma, different ways to build power, different frameworks for understanding strength. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective helps others who might be navigating similar situations, and your support inspires us to keep creating content that challenges how we think about survival, agency, and collective care. See you in the next story.